The freezing wind cut through Josephine Vance's thin shawl like a knife as she clutched her newborn son tighter to her chest, desperately trying to shield him from the merciless December chill. Arizona Territory, 1883, a place and time that offered little mercy to a woman alone with a child and nowhere to go. The tears that streaked her face threatened to freeze on her cheeks as she stumbled forward, her legs growing heavier with each step through the darkness outside quartzsite. "Hold on, my little one," she whispered, her voice trembling as much from fear as from cold. "We'll find shelter soon." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they might be a lie. Her brother-in-law had made sure of that when he'd thrown her out just hours after burying her husband, claiming the house and land were rightfully his now that Thomas was gone. Josephine had nothing but the clothes on her back, a small bundle of baby things, and her week-old son, who whimpered softly against her breast. The moon disappeared behind heavy clouds, taking with it what little light had guided her path. She had no idea where she was going, only that she needed to get as far from that house as possible. The first flakes of snow began to fall, unusual for this part of Arizona, but not unheard of. Josephine felt panic rising in her throat. The baby would not survive a night in the open, not in this weather. She herself might not make it till dawn. In the distance, a pinprick of light caught her attention. A lantern, perhaps, or a cabin window. Hope surged through her frozen limbs, giving her the strength to quicken her pace despite her exhaustion. As she drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a modest ranch house with a barn beside it. She hesitated at the edge of the property. She knew nothing of who lived there, whether they would help or harm her. But as her baby's cries grew more insistent and the snow fell heavier around them, she knew she had no choice. Josephine was halfway to the front door when her legs finally gave out. She crumpled to her knees in the snow, still cradling her son protectively. "Help," she called, but her voice was too weak to carry over the howling wind. "Please, somebody help us." Isaac Lawson had just finished stoking the fire in his cabin when he heard the faintest cry outside. He paused, head tilted, wondering if it was just the wind playing tricks on him. Then he heard it again, a sound almost like a baby, which made no sense out here, 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. Frowning, he grabbed his lantern and revolver, then stepped out onto his porch. The sudden blast of cold air made him blink, and the unexpected sight of snow falling made him curse under his breath. He lifted the lantern higher, its glow illuminating the yard. That's when he saw her, a woman collapsed in the snow, clutching something to her chest. "Good Lord," he muttered, holstering his gun and rushing forward. As he approached, he heard the unmistakable cry of an infant. Isaac knelt beside the woman, noting her blue lips and the way she shivered violently. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling shade of green despite their glazed appearance. "My baby," she whispered. "Please, help my baby." "I'll help you both," Isaac promised, carefully helping her to her feet. When it became clear she couldn't walk, he scooped her into his arms, mindful of the infant between them. "Hold tight to your little one, madam. I've got you." He carried them into his cabin, kicking the door shut behind him. The warmth of the fire hit them immediately, and the baby's cries grew stronger, a good sign, Isaac thought. He gently placed the woman on the sofa nearest the hearth, then hurried to grab every blanket he owned. "What's your name, madam?" he asked, as he wrapped a thick quilt around her shoulders. "Josephine," she said through chattering teeth. "Josephine Vance. This is my son. He has no name yet." She looked down at the infant with such love that Isaac felt something twist in his chest. "I'm Isaac Lawson. This is my ranch." He moved to the stove where a pot of coffee was still warm. "You need to get warm, both of you. Can you drink this while I check on your boy? Josephine nodded weakly, accepting the mug he offered with trembling hands. He's only a week old. I didn't know where else to go. Isaac carefully took the baby from her arms, unwrapping the thin blanket to check him over. The child was small but appeared healthy, his skin pink rather than blue, a miracle considering the cold. He seems strong, Isaac said, rewrapping him more securely. You did right protecting him from the worst of it. They threw us out, Josephine said suddenly, tears spilling down her cheeks. My husband's brother, after we buried Thomas 3 days ago, said the house was his by right now. I had nowhere, a sob choked off her words. Isaac felt a surge of anger. What kind of man would throw out a new widow with a newborn? You're safe now, he said firmly, handing the baby back to her. You can stay here tonight and we'll figure things out in the morning. Josephine looked up at him, still shivering despite the fire and blankets. Why would you help us? You don't know me. Isaac moved to add another log to the fire. My ma raised me better than to leave a woman and baby to freeze to death. He didn't add that something about her desperate courage had stirred something in him, something he'd thought long buried after years alone on this land. I can't repay you, she whispered. I'm not asking for payment, Mrs. Vance. Just try to rest now. As Josephine finally allowed her eyes to close, the baby nestled safely against her chest. Isaac watched them from across the room. He hadn't expected company tonight, hadn't expected company ever, really. He'd chosen this isolated spot outside Quartzsite precisely because he wanted to be left alone with his horses and his memories. Now, as the snow continued to fall outside, he wondered what the morning would bring. Morning came with a stillness that suggested the storm had passed. Isaac had slept poorly in the chair across from the sofa, waking at every small sound from his unexpected guests. He'd risen before dawn to tend to his horses, finding nearly 6 inches of snow on the ground unusual enough to make him worry about what it meant for travel in the coming days. When he returned to the cabin, he found Josephine awake, her color much improved as she nursed her son beneath a blanket. Good morning, she said softly, a blush coloring her cheeks. I hope we didn't disturb your sleep too much. Not at all, Isaac lied, moving to stoke the fire. How's the little one? Better now that he's warm and fed. She adjusted the blanket to cover herself as the baby finished. Mr. Lawson, I can't thank you enough for taking us in last night. Isaac, please. He busied himself with preparing breakfast, trying not to stare at the way the morning light caught in her auburn hair. And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said quietly. Not anyone. The baby made a small sound, and Josephine expertly shifted him to her shoulder, patting his back. Isaac watched the practiced motion. Not your first child, he asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. A shadow crossed her face. My third. We lost our daughter to fever last winter, our son. She swallowed hard. Our son died with his father. Isaac set down the pan he was holding. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pried. It's all right. You've earned the right to know who you've taken into your home. She looked down at the baby. Thomas never even got to hold him. He died in an accident at the silver mine 2 weeks before this little one arrived. Isaac felt a renewed surge of anger at the brother-in-law who'd thrown her out. And your husband's brother decided that was the right time to claim the property. Josephine's expression hardened. Harold always resented that Thomas inherited the house from their father, said it should have gone to him as the eldest. When Thomas died without a will, Harold claimed everything, said there was nothing in writing saying I had any right to stay. Her voice broke. I begged him for just a few more days until the baby and I were stronger, but he wouldn't hear it, said I could go to the church for charity. Did you? She shook her head. The minister's wife has never approved of me. I'm Catholic, you see, and Thomas was Protestant. Our marriage was controversial, she sighed. I thought perhaps I could make it to the next town, find work somehow, with a newborn. Isaac couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. I didn't have much choice, she said simply. Isaac served up the bacon and eggs he'd prepared, setting a plate before her. Eat. You need your strength, she hesitated. I should help. You're helping by getting well, he said firmly. You and the baby both. As they ate, Isaac studied her more carefully in the daylight. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 to his 32. Despite her exhaustion and the ordeal she'd been through, he could see she was beautiful high cheekbones, expressive green eyes, and that remarkable auburn hair. But it was the quiet dignity with which she carried herself that struck him most. The snow's deep, he said finally. Roads won't be passable for a couple of days at least. You're welcome to stay here until then. Relief washed over her face. That's very generous. I promise we won't be a burden. You're not, he said simply. It's nice to have company for a change. You live here alone, Isaac nodded. 4 years now, just me and the horses. You're a rancher, horse breeder. I train them too for the cavalry mostly. Josephine looked around the cabin with new eyes, noting the simple but solid furnishings, the books stacked on a small shelf, the lack of any personal touches. It's a good piece of land you have. It suits me. He cleared their plates, uncomfortable with how easily she seemed to see into his solitary existence. What will you do when the road's clear? She glanced down at her son, who had fallen asleep in her arms. I don't know, she admitted. I have a cousin in Prescott, but I haven't spoken to her in years. I don't know if she'd take us in. What about your own family? My parents died years ago. I have a brother somewhere back east, but we lost touch when I came west with Thomas. She met his eyes directly. I'll find something. I always do. Isaac nodded, recognizing the determination in her voice. I'm sure you will, but there's no rush. The offer stands. Stay until you're strong enough and have a proper plan. Over the next 3 days, the snow began to melt, but Isaac found himself inventing reasons why Josephine and her son shouldn't leave just yet. The baby seemed too delicate for travel. The trails would still be muddy and treacherous. The stagecoach wouldn't be running on schedule. And Josephine, for her part, didn't argue too strenuously. She'd regained her strength quickly, insisting on helping with the cooking and cleaning despite Isaac's protests. In the evenings, they sat by the fire talking, discovering shared interests in books and music. She told him about growing up in Boston, about meeting Thomas when he'd come east to find investors for the mine, about their early happy years in Arizona before the losses began to mount. Isaac shared less, but more than he'd shared with anyone in years. How he'd come west after the war with nothing but nightmares and a knack with horses. How he'd worked ranch jobs until he could save enough for this land. How he preferred the company of his horses to most people. They don't judge, he explained one evening as they sat watching the flames dance. They don't want anything from you except fair treatment. Josephine smiled, her hands busy with mending one of his shirts. People can be like that too, you know. Not everyone wants something. Maybe, he wasn't convinced. Your husband, was he a good man? Yes, she said without hesitation. Kind. Hardworking. Not always practical. He was a dreamer, always certain the next big strike was just around the corner. But he loved me, and he would have loved this little one. She looked down at the baby sleeping in a makeshift cradle Isaac had fashioned from a drawer. Have you thought of a name for him yet? I've been considering Matthew after my father. She set down her sewing. Isaac, can I ask you something? Of course. Why haven't you married a man with land, with skills? You must have had opportunities. Isaac stared into the fire for a long moment. Once, he admitted, before the war, but then I came back, changed, and she'd moved on. he shrugged. After that, it didn't seem important. You were in the war, Union cavalry, not something I care to remember. Josephine nodded, understanding in her eyes. Thomas had nightmares sometimes, things he'd seen in the mine, accidents. I understand not wanting to remember. They sat in companionable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, as Isaac lay in his bed, he'd insisted Josephine take it. While he used a pallet on the floor, he realized with a jolt that he hadn't thought about the war in days. Somehow, Josephine's presence had pushed those old ghosts further away. On the fourth morning, as they ate breakfast, a knock at the door startled them both. "Expecting company?" Josephine asked, her face suddenly pale. "Never," Isaac said, rising with a frown. He opened the door to find his nearest neighbor, Bill Parker, standing there. "Morning, Isaac," Bill said, stomping snow from his boots. "Just checking you survived that storm all right. Caught us all by—" He stopped abruptly, spotting Josephine at the table with the baby. His eyebrows shot up. "Well now, didn't know you had visitors. Bill Parker, this is Mrs. Josephine Vance and her son," Isaac said stiffly. "They got caught in the storm. I'm giving them shelter until the road's clear." Bill's expression shifted from surprise to something knowing that set Isaac's teeth on edge. "Mighty generous of you," he said. "Roads to town are passable now, by the way. That's why I rode over." "Thank you for letting us know," Josephine said politely, though Isaac noticed she'd moved closer to the baby. After Bill left, promising to keep their secret with a wink that made Isaac want to punch him, an uncomfortable silence fell over the cabin. "He'll tell everyone in Quartzsite you're staying here," Isaac finally said. "Small towns and gossip." "I should go," Josephine said immediately. "I don't want to damage your reputation." "Hang my reputation," Isaac said with surprising force. "I'm worried about yours." Josephine gave a small, bitter laugh. "Mr. Lawson, Isaac, I'm a widow with a newborn and no home. My reputation is already in tatters, I'm afraid." All the more reason not to give them more to talk about. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "The stagecoach leaves for Prescott tomorrow morning. If you're determined to go to your cousin's, that would be your best option." She nodded, trying to hide the disappointment in her eyes. "Yes, that would be best. If you could loan me the fare, I promise to repay you as soon as I'm able." "I'll take you into town myself," he said, already dreading the return to his empty cabin. "We can get you supplies for the journey." That evening, they packed the few belongings Josephine had, plus some additional necessities Isaac insisted on providing. The baby, whom Josephine had decided to call Matthew, after all seemed to sense the change coming, fussing more than usual until Josephine sang him to sleep with a soft lullaby. As she rocked the child, Isaac watched from across the room, trying to memorize the picture they made in the firelight. He'd grown accustomed to their presence with alarming speed. The cabin, which had always seemed perfectly adequate before, would feel impossibly empty without them. "Josephine," he said suddenly, the words coming before he could think better of them, "you could stay." She looked up, her eyes wide. "What? Stay here with me?" He moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. "I know it's sudden, I know we barely know each other, but these past days, I haven't felt this alive in years." "Isaac, I'm not asking for anything improper," he hurried to add. "There's a small cabin nearer to the barn. It was here when I bought the place. I use it for storage, but it could be fixed up. You and Matthew could live there, have your own space. You could help with the house, the cooking maybe, and I'd provide for you both." He took a deep breath. "In time, if feelings developed between us, well, we could consider something more permanent." Josephine stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You would do that? Take responsibility for another man's wife and child?" "You're not his wife anymore," Isaac said gently. "And this child deserves a chance, as do you." Tears filled her eyes. Why? Why would you do this? Isaac considered his words carefully. Because when I found you in that snow, something changed. It was like finding something I didn't know I'd lost. He reached out hesitantly, touching her hand where it rested on Matthew's blanket. I've been alone a long time, Josephine. By choice, yes, but also because I never met anyone who made me want to be otherwise. Until now. A tear slipped down her cheek. This is madness. You don't know me. I know enough. He squeezed her fingers lightly. I know you're brave and strong. I know you love your son fiercely. I know you make this place feel like a home for the first time since I built it. He smiled slightly. The rest we can learn along the way. Josephine looked down at Matthew, then back at Isaac. What if it doesn't work? What if you come to resent us? Then I'll make sure you have the means to go wherever you wish, he promised. But I don't think that will happen. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. The cabin by the barn, would it be warm enough for the baby? Hope surged in Isaac's chest. I'll make it warm. I can have it ready within a week. And in the meantime, you keep the bed. I'm perfectly fine on my pallet. Josephine studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, she finally nodded. All right, we'll stay for now. But I want to contribute, not just with housework. I can keep accounts. I help Thomas with the mine paperwork. I could use help with the books, Isaac admitted. I'm no hand with figures. Then we have an agreement. She extended her free hand as if to seal a business arrangement. Isaac took it, but instead of shaking, he raised it to his lips in a gesture that surprised them both. An agreement, he echoed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The next morning, instead of heading to the stagecoach office, they rode into Quartzsite for supplies to renovate the small cabin. The curious stares of the townspeople followed them as they loaded lumber and tools into Isaac's wagon. But for once, he found he didn't care what anyone thought. As winter gave way to spring, the small cabin by the barn was transformed. Isaac replaced the roof, added proper windows, built a stone fireplace, and constructed furniture sized for Josephine and a growing baby. Josephine, for her part, sewed curtains and quilts, planted flowers outside the door, and gradually turned the simple structure into a true home. True to her word, she also took over Isaac's chaotic bookkeeping, bringing order to years of haphazard records. To his surprise, she discovered he was considerably more profitable than he'd realized. He simply hadn't been tracking his income properly. You could expand, she told him one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset. Matthew, now 3 months old, was sleeping peacefully in her arms. Buy more breeding stock, take on larger cavalry contracts. I never thought about it, he admitted. I only ever aimed to have enough for my needs. But you could build something more, she persisted. Something to pass on someday. Isaac glanced at Matthew, then quickly away, not wanting her to see the direction of his thoughts. In the months since they'd arrived, he'd grown increasingly attached to both of them. Matthew's first real smile had been directed at him, a moment that had left Isaac speechless with a strange, fierce joy. And Josephine. She'd blossomed with security and purpose, the haunted look gradually leaving her eyes. She laughed more, sang as she worked, brought life and color to his austere existence. He found himself inventing reasons to be near her, to hear her voice, to see her smile. Yet he hadn't pressed for more than the arrangement they'd agreed upon. She still lived in the small cabin with Matthew, coming to the main house during the day to cook and keep the books. In the evenings, they often shared dinner, talking late into the night, but he always walked her back to her door, never presuming more. Something to pass on, he echoed now, watching as the last rays of sun painted the mountains gold. I suppose I never thought that far ahead. It's worth considering, she said softly. The future, I mean. Their eyes met, and Isaac felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. Josephine, Mr. Lawson, you out there? The call came from the main road, interrupting whatever he might have said. Isaac stood, frustrated by the interruption. Over here, he called back. A rider approached, one of the hands from the Blackburn Ranch to the south. Evening, sir, Mrs. Vance. He tipped his hat. Mr. Blackburn sent me to ask if you'd come look at a stallion that's been giving us trouble. Figured you might have some ideas, being as you've got such a way with difficult horses. Isaac glanced at Josephine, who nodded encouragingly. Go, we'll be fine. It sounds important. I'll be back before dark, he promised, already reaching for his hat. It was well past midnight when he returned, having spent hours working with the Blackburns' troublesome stallion. The main house was dark, but a light still burned in Josephine's cabin. Concerned, he tied up his horse and knocked softly at her door. Isaac. She opened it immediately, still fully dressed. I was worried. The horse was more stubborn than expected, he explained, suddenly aware of how intimate it felt to be standing at her door so late. Why are you still up? Is Matthew all right? He's fine, sleeping through the night now. She hesitated, then stepped back. Come in for a moment, I have something to show you. Isaac followed her inside, removing his hat. The cabin was warm and cozy, with Matthew's cradle in the corner and Josephine's few possessions arranged neatly on shelves Isaac had built. On the small table lay an official-looking document. What's this? He asked, moving closer. It came today, while you were working with the horses. Josephine picked up the paper, her hand trembling slightly. It's from a lawyer in Prescott. My cousin must have heard about my situation somehow. She died, Isaac, 6 months ago. I'm sorry, he said, genuinely regretful for her loss. We weren't close, Josephine admitted. But she had no children of her own, and it seems she remembered me in her will. She handed him the document. She left me her house and a small sum of money, enough to be independent. Isaac felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath him. You're leaving, he said, the words falling like stones. I don't know, Josephine said, her eyes searching his face. It would be the sensible thing, a house of my own in a proper town with schools for Matthew eventually. Yes, he managed, though the word felt like ash in his mouth. Sensible. But I've been thinking about what you said about the future. She took a step closer. Isaac, these months here, they've been the happiest I've known in a very long time. Hope flickered in his chest, but he forced himself to be fair. You were in mourning when you came. Starting over after tragedy, of course anything would seem better. Do you really believe that's all this is? She reached out, touching his arm. Because I don't, I think we've built something here, something real. Isaac covered her hand with his own. Josephine, I don't want you to feel obligated. You have choices now, independence. And if my choice is to stay, her voice was barely above a whisper. If my choice is you, the last of his restraint crumbled. Isaac pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. Josephine responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not as my housekeeper or bookkeeper, stay as my wife. Josephine's eyes widened. Your wife, I love you, he said simply. I think I started falling the moment I found you in the snow. I love Matthew too, as if he were my own. I want to be a family, a real one. Tears filled her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I've been so afraid to admit it, even to myself, after losing Thomas, losing everything. I was terrified to want anything again. I understand fear, Isaac said, brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. But I also know now that some things are worth the risk. A small sound from the cradle drew their attention. Matthew was awake, making the little noises that preceded full-blown crying. Josephine moved to pick him up, but Isaac stopped her. "May I?" he asked. She nodded, watching as Isaac carefully lifted the baby, cradling him with practiced ease that had developed over the months. "Hey there, little man," Isaac murmured, rocking gently. "What's all this fuss about, HM?" To Josephine's amazement, Matthew quieted immediately, staring up at Isaac with complete trust. The sight of them together, this strong, solemn man so gentle with her child, made her heart swell. "He knows who you are," she said softly. "He trusts you, smart boy," Isaac said, smiling down at the infant. He looked back at Josephine. "Is that a yes, then? You'll marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in the small church in Quartzsite. The entire town turned out, partly from genuine goodwill, but mostly from curiosity about the couple who had been the subject of so much gossip. Josephine wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Isaac, uncomfortable in his Sunday best, couldn't take his eyes off her. "Never seen Lawson smile so much," Bill Parker commented to his wife during the small reception afterward. "That woman's worked a miracle on him." "It goes both ways, Mrs. Parker replied, watching as Josephine laughed at something Isaac said. "She came here broken, from what I hear. Looks whole now." That night, after the celebrations were done and they returned to the ranch, to the main house, where Josephine and Matthew would now live, Isaac carried his new wife over the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, setting her down gently in the main room, which Josephine had gradually transformed over the months with her touches. "It feels like I've been home for a while now," she admitted, reaching up to loosen his tie. "Since that first night, really." Later, with Matthew sleeping soundly in the cradle, they'd moved to a corner of their bedroom. They lay together in the soft darkness, talking about the future. "I've been thinking about what you said," Isaac murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About expanding the ranch. Building something to pass on." "And," Josephine prompted, her head resting on his chest, "I think we should do it. Buy more land to the east, increase the breeding stock, maybe even build a proper training corral." He paused. "For Matthew someday, and maybe others." Josephine raised her head to look at him. "Others?" Isaac's hand moved to rest lightly on her stomach. "If you wanted," he said carefully, "more children, our children." The smile that bloomed on her face was answer enough, even before she whispered, "I'd like that very much." As spring turned to summer, Josephine discovered she was expecting. Matthew, now crawling and beginning to pull himself up on furniture, thrived under the doting attention of both his mother and the man he was already beginning to recognize as his father. Isaac, true to his word, began expanding the ranch operations. With Josephine's careful management of their finances and her cousin's inheritance, they purchased adjoining land and built new facilities. Isaac's reputation as a horse trainer grew, bringing more lucrative contracts and opportunities. In January of 1885, Josephine gave birth to a son they named Benjamin. Isaac, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom during Matthew's birth, was by her side this time, holding her hand through every contraction, his face a mixture of terror and awe. "He's perfect," Isaac whispered, holding his son for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Just like his mother." Josephine reached out to touch the baby's downy head. "Like his father, I think. He has your chin." Matthew, not quite 2, was brought in to meet his brother, his face serious as he examined the new addition to their family. "Baby," he said solemnly, one of the few words in his growing vocabulary. "That's right," Isaac said, kneeling to his level. "This is your brother Benjamin." You'll need to help us look after him." Matthew nodded as if accepting an important mission, then leaned forward to plant a wet kiss on the baby's forehead. As the family grew, so did the ranch. By 1890, the Lawson Horse Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. Known for its exceptional breeding stock and Isaac's unique training methods that emphasized patience over breaking a horse's spirit. Josephine's cousin's house in Prescott was sold, the proceeds invested in the ranch and set aside for the children's education. The small cabin by the barn was expanded and improved to serve as a home for their foreman, a capable young man named Robert who had a gift with horses, second only to Isaac's. Matthew, now 7, was the spitting image of his biological father according to Josephine, but had inherited Isaac's quiet determination and love of horses. Benjamin, 5, was more like his mother, quick-witted, charming, and endlessly curious. And there was 3-year-old Eleanor, their surprise baby, who had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "She'll be riding before she can properly walk," Josephine predicted one evening, watching as Isaac demonstrated to his daughter how to offer an apple to one of the gentler mares. "Is that such a bad thing?" Isaac asked with a grin. "She's a Lawson, after all. Horses are in her blood." "As they apparently are in mine now," Josephine said, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched Eleanor squeal with delight when the horse's soft muzzle tickled her palm. "If anyone had told me 7 years ago that I'd become a ranch wife with a house full of children and more horses than I can count, you'd have thought they were mad," Isaac finished for her. "Almost as mad as a woman who accepted shelter from a stranger in a snowstorm. Or a man who proposed marriage to a penniless widow he barely knew," she countered. Isaac turned to face her fully, his expression growing serious. "Best madness I ever gave into," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "No regrets." Josephine smiled, thinking of the terrified young woman she'd been, clutching her newborn son in the snow with no hope and nowhere to go. "Not a single one," she said truthfully. That night, as they lay in bed after the children were asleep, Josephine curled against Isaac's side in their familiar position. "I had a letter from Harold today," she said quietly. "Thomas's brother rarely contacted them, and when he did, it was never good news." Isaac's arm tightened around her. "What does he want now?" "Nothing, surprisingly. He's selling the house, moving to California apparently. He wrote to ask if there were any personal items of Thomas's I wanted before he clears everything out." "And is there?" Josephine considered. "There was a pocket watch that belonged to Thomas's grandfather. I thought Matthew might like to have it someday. A connection to his father." Isaac nodded. "I'll write back tomorrow, ask him to send it." "Thank you." She hesitated. "Does it bother you?" "That Matthew isn't—" "Don't," Isaac interrupted firmly. "Matthew is my son in every way that matters. So is Benjamin. So is Eleanor, my daughter. Blood doesn't make a family, Josephine. Love does." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I've loved that boy since he was tiny enough to fit in one hand." Josephine blinked back tears, overwhelmed by gratitude for this man who had saved not just her life, but her soul. "I didn't know men like you existed," she admitted. "After Harold threw us out after everything, I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again." "I'm glad you took a chance on me," Isaac said softly. "We both needed saving that night, I think." As the years passed, the Lawson Ranch prospered, as did the family. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited Isaac's gift with troubled horses. When he was 16, Isaac formally adopted him, though both considered it merely a legal recognition of what had been true for years. Benjamin, more interested in books than horses, surprised everyone by announcing his intention to become a doctor after a visiting physician treated Eleanor for a broken arm. Isaac built an addition to the house specifically to give the boy a quiet place to study. Eleanor, true to her mother's prediction, was riding before she could properly walk and grew into a fearless young woman who could outride most of the ranch hands. She also inherited Josephine's head for business, taking over the ranch accounts when she was just 14. In 1895, Josephine gave birth to their fourth child, a boy they named Daniel, who came into the world with a lusty cry and his mother's green eyes. "I thought we were done with midnight feedings," Isaac teased as he watched Josephine nurse their unexpected blessing. "So did I," she laughed. "But I can't say I'm sorry." "Nor am I," Isaac admitted, marveling at how his once solitary life had become so beautifully full. "Though we may need to build on again if our family keeps growing." As the century drew to a close, Arizona prepared for statehood, and the frontier way of life began to change. Railroads brought more settlers, towns expanded into cities, and the wild, open spaces that had defined the territory began to shrink. The Lawson Ranch adapted with the times. Isaac, with Matthew's help, shifted their focus from cavalry horses to breeding stock for the growing number of ranches in the region. Josephine, whose early bookkeeping had evolved into a talent for investment, helped them weather the economic uncertainties of the era. In 1902, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that drew friends from as far as Phoenix, Isaac found himself watching Josephine from across their crowded yard. At 44, she was still beautiful to him, the auburn in her hair now threaded with silver, the laugh lines around her eyes only enhancing her expressiveness. "Penny for your thoughts, husband," she said, joining him at the edge of the celebration. "Just thinking how lucky I am," he replied, taking her hand. "How different life would have been if you hadn't found your way to my door that night." "If you hadn't heard me," she corrected. "If you hadn't come looking." They both turned to look at their family. Matthew, now 19 and recently engaged to the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Benjamin, 17, deep in conversation with the local doctor who had taken him on as an apprentice. Eleanor, 15, supervising her younger brother as they served cake to the guests. And Daniel, 7, attempting to sneak a second piece without being noticed. "We built something good," Isaac said, his voice rough with emotion. "We did," Josephine agreed. "Something that will last." As their guests departed and the children helped clean up, Isaac pulled Josephine aside, leading her to the spot where he'd found her all those years ago. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small box. "I've been saving for it a while." Josephine opened it to find a delicate gold locket, intricately engraved. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them on their wedding day. "Isaac, it's beautiful," she breathed. "Turn it over," he urged. On the back, an inscription, found in the snow, bloomed in the sun. "Forever grateful." Tears filled Josephine's eyes as Isaac fastened the chain around her neck. "I'm the grateful one," she whispered. "You saved us." "No," he said, drawing her into his arms. "You saved me. I was half alive before you came, just existing. You gave me a reason to truly live again." He kissed her gently. "I love you, Josephine Lawson, more today than yesterday and not as much as tomorrow." "That sounds like something from one of Benjamin's poetry books," she teased, though her eyes shone with emotion. "Maybe I'm becoming poetic in my old age," Isaac laughed. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house, the home they had built together, filled with love and laughter, and the future they had created from that desperate night in the snow. In the years that followed, they watched their children grow and build lives of their own. Matthew took over more of the ranch operations, eventually bringing his wife and their children to live in a new house built on the expanded property. Benjamin completed his medical training and returned to establish a practice in Quartzsite, which had grown from a small settlement into a proper town. Eleanor, to everyone's surprise, married a railroad man and moved to California, though she returned often with her own growing family. Daniel, the baby who had kept them young, showed signs of inheriting both his father's way with horses and his mother's business acumen. As they entered their golden years, Isaac and Josephine could look back on a life richly lived, on challenges overcome and joys multiplied by sharing. The ranch that had once been a solitary man's refuge had become the heart of a dynasty, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howled around the eaves of the house they had made a home, they would remember that first night a desperate woman with a newborn child, a lonely man with a warm hearth, and the snowstorm that had brought them together against all odds. Divine intervention, Josephine would say, nestled against Isaac's side just as she had been for decades. The best kind of luck, Isaac would counter, pressing a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. But both knew it was something more profound, a moment when two broken lives had found in each other exactly what they needed to become whole again. A love story written not in grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but in daily choices to trust, to forgive, to build something lasting together. A love born in the snow, but strong enough to weather any storm.